Avast, mateys. I have a briny question for you. How many seas are there? Did you say 7? False, but more on that later. Turns out there's a lot more seas. I mean, like, a lot more. So, to rid ourselves of such ignorance, we will be sailing the far more than 7 seas to examine every sea there is. This is everything.
Every sea. First, we must ask ourselves, what is a sea? Well, informally, it's just a reference to the ocean, any part of the ocean. However, geographically, it's specifically a division of an ocean that's enclosed by land in some way, with one example being the Sargasso Sea. So seas are found around land. So true seas, therefore, must be salty because they are part of the ocean. So even if they are inland seas, they still have to be connected to the ocean and salty. And one of the tricky bits about what are and aren't seas is seas aren't always called seas. They can be called by other names. Most obvious example is there's some things that are called bays or gulfs that are actually seas, though not all bays or gulfs are seas, so it's a little confusing. So you'll see in this talk here, I'll refer to some bays and some gulfs in our seas because they're classically considered seas. Another description for our true seas is a marginal sea. That term comes up. So for our purposes here of every sea, we're going to consider all true seas. So the definition of the geographical definition, division, ocean, salty, etc. But we will all also throw in non-seas with the name of sea in them, like salt or freshwater lakes, things like the Dead Sea or the Red Sea. Just for completeness, I'll try and make a note of what ones aren't technically seas, even though they're called seas. Before moving on, let's address another question. What about the 7 seas? You've maybe heard the term 7 seas before, but clearly there are more than 7 seas, so what gives? Well, it really depends on the time and place when we talk about the 7 seas. In fact, in a certain time and place for me, the 7 seas meant the best hotel in the Bismarck-Mandan area, but sadly no longer. Anyways, more broadly speaking, Greek literature places them in the Greek realms, being the seas of the Aegean, Adriatic, Mediterranean, Black, Red, Caspian, and then the Persian Gulf thrown in as well. So those were the 7 seas of Greek antiquity, and that's where the first Greek literature is where we first get the term 7 seas. There's other compilations like medieval Europe had different seas, but the Greek one is the first and possibly most important one. Now, a modern interpretation is subdivisions of the ocean. So the 7 seas are actually ocean subdivisions, those being the Arctic, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, North Pacific, South Pacific, Indian, and Southern or Antarctic Ocean. So that's what the 7 seas are in our case here. So with that, let's start our exploration of every seas. We'll start with the oceans because the oceans are informally considered seas. Now I have kind of the world map here. We see that the big ones we've got going on here are going to be, the Pacific Ocean. That is the largest, whether you split it or not. Then we have the Atlantic down through here, the Indian, the Arctic Ocean, and then I was always taught there's just 4, but then other people and references also have the Southern Ocean, so the water around Antarctica as its own ocean. So there's either 4 or 5 as you go. I'll use 5 because that's what sort of the definitive sources kind of showed me. Anyways, let's look at them on a globe. So we see the Arctic Ocean is, of course, in the Arctic here. The Pacific, again, can be split into North and South. It runs between North and South America and East Asia, Oceania. where the North Atlantic is split the other way between the east coast of North and South America, and then Europe and Africa. Again, it can be split in North and South Atlantic. And then the Indian Ocean is sort of broadly, starts at India, straddles Africa, Oceania, and then goes down to a certain level not surrounding the Southern Ocean, which the Southern Ocean is the one surrounding Antarctica. Okay, we took care of those oceans. Now let's turn to seas proper. I'm going to split out the various seas we'll consider into what I call sea sections, parts of the world that all sort of fit together, just so we can sort of conceptualize it and not go crazy. So we'll start out. There'll be several sea sections. We'll start with North America. So I'll roughly consider this part of the world. That's one. Then we'll take care of Central and South America around here. Then we'll take roughly northern-esque Europe, Southern Europe with some of this stuff here, then Africa in the Middle East. It gets a little bit sort of quirky here. Then we'll swing over Japan itself, because Japan has all these little seas apparently. Then we'll consider the bigger surrounding area of Russia, kind of China, and Korea, that kind of area. Then I'll deal with Indonesia and the Philippines, that kind of area here. India, and then other sort of Oceania will go kind of from there. And then finally, we'll consider Antarctica. So those are our sections we'll consider. All right, we'll get started here with North America, Canada in particular. Now, I use two main resources. There's this site called List of Seas, and then Google's List of Seas. Now, it was this list. I couldn't find anything more definitive than those. So one of the problems in the List of Seas for Canada, they had a bunch of these little seas called like either rips or rapids or whatnot, and the only information I could find on them outside this list were like these small pages on Wikipedia translated from another language. So I'm really sure how much they are seas, but I'm going to include them. So I have sort of on the sides here where they're located. The 8 we'll consider now on the East Coast is Bulkhead Rip, Cape Rip, Leading Tickles, Moore Rip, Northwest Rip, Outer Rip, Shag Harbor Rip, and Tail of the Rip. And they're all, for the most part, found, and they're not going to show up in this map here, in sort of the Nova Scotia, New Brunswick area. It looks like it kind of seems lining on top of each other, but Bulkhead Rip seems to be right around here, Cape Rip, as well as Moore Rip, Northwest Rip, Outer Rip, Shag Harbor Rip, and then Tail Rip. They seem indistinguishable here. I'm assuming they're all these like little bays or sort of inlets in the local area being named quote-unquote seas at some point. The only real difference one here is that the Leading Tickles look to be farther up around the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It may be sort of the end of the Gulf of St. Lawrence here between Newfoundland and Labrador, and St. Pierre and Miquelon. I'm not very good at pronunciation. So those are those. Now continuing these strange little rips and rapids, moving over to the west side, we have Clement Rapids, Dent Rapids, Galloway Rapids, Waikato Rapids, and Greenpoint Rapids, as well as in the state's northwestern straits. Let's start with Clement Rapids and Dent Rapids and Galloway. They seem to be all around the area here of British Columbia. Maybe some of these sort of inlet areas. They do appear to be kind of different, where Galloway and now Waikato is more in the central Same with Clement, where like Dent Rapids is sort of farther, and then Greenpoint Rapids maybe even being around Vancouver Island. Like I said, it's not none of this is going to show up in here. Whereas Northwestern Straits looks like to be on the U.S. area in sort of like the Seattle area. So maybe this strait here or something going farther into Seattle. That's about as good as I can get with these strange small things they call seas, but I don't get a lot of references for them. Great, we finish up with those sort of weird little things that may or may not be seas around the coasts of Canada. Let's get to some bigger, more definitive seas. We start with Hudson Bay, which is a sea. It's here in Canada, by Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Nunavut. Moving up, we have the Northwest Passages, which may or may not be technically a sea. Some references say it is, some aren't, so I'm just going to consider it. It's kind of big enough. Moving down between Newfoundland, Labrador, and Greenland, we have the Labrador Sea. So unsurprisingly, it's next to Labrador. And then moving up here between Greenland and parts of northern Canada is Baffin Bay, another sea. If we swing up around Greenland here, we have this part of the ocean here, which is not labeled but in Google Maps, but this is the Lincoln Sea here. So between, I think this is Ellesmere Island and then North Greenland. If we swing around here, again, we're not going to see anything here, unfortunately, but this is what's called the Wandel Sea here on the northeast of Greenland. It's also, I've seen references as it being called the McKinley Sea, so whatever you like there. And then we have on the east here the Greenland Sea between here and northern Europe. And then this again doesn't show up here, but sort of down here in the southeast area between Greenland and kind of Iceland, we have the Erminger Sea. All right, finishing up our tour around the Greenland area, we have Queen Victoria Sea, which won't show up here, and it's a little hard to tell from the little icon on the left I have of these here. Looks like it's going to be somewhere above Svalbard, the islands of Svalbard, somewhere out here in the Arctic Ocean. Another one in the Arctic Ocean we have here is Prince Gustav Adolf Sea, which looks to be above, these are like the Queen Elizabeth Islands, so somewhere above here in the Arctic Ocean again. All right, finishing up with that, let's move over to Alaska. Starting out, we have above Alaska in the north, the Beaufort Sea. Then moving along, starting to be between Alaska and Europe, Russia. We have the Chukchi Sea. Then down to the southwest, we have the Bering Sea. And then finally, finishing up our tour of North America here, we're going down to what's called the Salish Sea, and unlike some of these like rips and tickles and rapids, this seems to be a legitimate sea. And it's actually where the Northwestern Straits is also located. The Salish Sea is kind of located in the Vancouver area, Seattle, Vancouver Island. This whole sort of area here is known as the Salish Sea. We'll move on to our next sea section, Central and South America, and we'll actually start with something that's still technically North America in California. We'll be looking at something that's not technically a sea, but it's called a sea. It's called the Salton Sea. It is a landlocked body of salt water in California here. So we have the Salton Sea. But we included that here because it fits nicely in the next things we're going to go into, which is the Gulf of California, which is also known as the Sea of Cortez. So we got here. Speaking of gulfs, moving over to the right here, we have the Gulf of Mexico, which encircles or is encircled by Florida, a lot of these southern U.S. states, and then Mexico. But then moving farther down into the Caribbean, we have the Caribbean Sea. Then we have another sea, which is the only sea that's not defined by being surrounded by land, but rather ocean currents. We have the Sargasso Sea, which is roughly kind of found around here, with sort of Bermuda almost at its center. So this sort of whole area is the Sargasso Sea. And moving out, let's go down to the Central America, to Argentina. We have, this isn't going to show up here in Google Maps, but we have the Argentine Sea, somewhere around Argentina's east coast. Then we have the Chilean Sea, which is, so for Chile, around this part of the Pacific Ocean. It's not clear exactly how much of this starts and ends, but that's involving known as the Chile Sea. And then there's the Grau Sea, or the Mar de Grau, and that is found in Peru, so farther north here, kind of along the coast of Peru. It's been labeled as a sea. And that's all we have for Central and South America. Skipping across the pond here, let's consider Northern Europe. We'll start at the far east, like really merging into Russia proper, but it kind of fits here better. So we have the Kara Sea up in the north here, above this island that I can't pronounce. Then we have the Barents Sea, sort of above the Nordic countries. We go down here. I think this is technically Russia, so there's the White Sea, and we'll pop up. Oh, there we go, White Sea here. Then above on the coastline of the Norwegian Sea, Norway, there's the Norwegian Sea. And then there's another sea that I found in some references called Land Mean, which is sort of small, kind of marginal sea in the coastline around here. It doesn't really show up here, but this is where it's supposed to be located, given my little picture. Okay, let's move now into the Baltic Sea here. It's the largest area here. There's also some smaller seas kind of within the Baltic. First around, Norway, Sweden. There's this part of water here that's called Kattegat or Kattegat, which is supposed to be a sea. There's also a thing called, I think it's Skagerrak, which isn't considered a sea. I'm not sure why one is and one's not, but there we go there. There's also kind of up here, I guess around, I think it's the Saaremaa, like this sort of area here. This is considered either Suristomeri or the Archipelago Sea, sort of this north area here around the Gulf of Finland, to the entrance of the Gulf of Finland. And there's also a sea near Estonia here, also considered a strait or a sub-bay. It's called the Vinemiri Sea, so it's around this here. You can see that at least something's being called here, Vinemiri. Okay, with that, let's kind of move off here and zoom out, go over to more of the coast of Germany and Netherlands. This whole sort of area here is known as the Wadden Sea, so this coastline here, some of these islands, etc. And then if we go back up to, Finland, and this sort of what's called the Gulf of Bothnia, there are a couple of things that are considered seas within it. So this main area here, chunk here, maybe from like Vasa down to this island, is known as the Bothnian Sea, so that's probably synonymous with Gulf of Bothnia. And then there's this smaller piece here, kind of between this island and Sweden. This area is also known as the Åland Sea. I don't think it's going to show up. Well, it kind of does see this is I think whatever Nordic country pronunciation and language, the Ålands hav. Hav means sea in one of these Nordic languages. Okay. Finishing up Northern Europe, we have the Celtic Sea down here to the the west of the English Channel. And then moving in kind of between Ireland and the United Kingdom, this is traditionally known as the Irish Sea. And there's also the Sea of the Hebrides, so going up to Scotland, the Hebrides Islands, the sea here. And then finally, a very small sea. I don't think it's going to show up at all, but in northern France, here, kind of below the English Channel, this sort of area here is known as the Irois Sea or Irois Sea. I'm not good at pronunciation, but there we have it. Now into southern Europe, more or less. Let's start in Greece with the Aegean Sea here to the east of Greece. Other parts of the sea around here, if we zoom up here, this sort of inlet, here's the Sea of Marmara. And then there is also the Sea of Crete, which is sort of down here. I don't think it's going to show up, but, or wait, yeah, above Crete here. So, oh, there it is, Sea of Crete. So there we go. Then we have further out down here, of course, the biggest sea around, the Mediterranean Sea, which is sometimes also split up into two kind of smaller seas within the Mediterranean. The first one is the Libyan Sea, which I don't think is going to show up. Yeah, but is sort of the western part of it above Libya. And then to the right, more around Cyprus, Lebanon, is the Levantine Sea. And I don't think it's going to show up either. But there is that. Then moving around here, kind of up to the west of Italy, we have the Tyrrhenian Sea. And then above the island of Corsica, we have the, I think this is going to show up, Ligurian Sea. This is all still kind of part of the Mediterranean. But then going down here on the eastern coast of Spain, we have the Balearic Sea. And going farther down near the Gibraltar, we have the Iberian Sea. And there is one more sea that I don't think is going to show up that's often described here. It's kind of in between here, in between Sardinia and this island here, which I can't pronounce the name. This is often known as the Sea of Sardinia. So there we go. We're kind of all over the place here in southern Europe. You might have noticed we sort of skipped over some seas. We'll swing back around and take care of them. First of all, we have the Adriatic Sea on the east coast of Italy here. And then moving down the Ionian Sea near the Boot. Then heading back to sort of Greece, there's a couple seas. First of all, we have in this Pelagos, the Myrtune Pelagos. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Also known as the Myrtune Sea. Pelagos, I believe, means sea in Greek. And then there's another one that I don't know if it shows up, but it's known as Thalasia Cheimaris. Again, I'm probably butchering that. It's sort of on the border of like Greece and Albania, somewhere in this sort of area here. I guess I'm not seeing it, but that is somewhere where it's located, kind of by that little icon. Okay, keep looking at the Aegean Sea. Up at the top here, near Bulgaria, we have, where is it? It's going to pop up. The Thracian Sea, that's up top here. Then we have the Icarian Sea over on Asia Minor side. Let's see that now. It's still the Aegean Sea. Where is it? It's going to pop up. The Carian Sea right here. See the Pelagos here. And then to wrap up our tour de Europe, we're going to go over to Spain. In the top here, in the Bay of Biscay, kind of on this coast here, there is the Cantabrian Sea. Again, I'm not seeing it show up, so it might be fairly small and obscure, but that is where it is noted to be, sort of this area in the north of Spain. Getting now to Africa and the Middle East, let's start with the Holy Land, with a couple of things that is, in fact, not seas. So first of all, up north here, if it'll resolve, there we go. We have the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a freshwater lake. Not a sea at all, not even salty. So not a true sea, but named sea. And then going down farther, just for some context here, farther north, this is the Dead Sea, which is also not a sea because it's landlocked, a true sea, but it is a salt lake, so it's salty. Then speaking of other things that are more like lakes, let's zoom a little bit higher out, getting really more into Asia. We're going to skip over this big guy, for example, this glaring body of water, to look at a smaller one to start with. So this here is the Aral Sea. There's a couple different parts. This is also a salt lake because it's landlocked, but it has sea in the name. And then one of the biggest bodies of landlocked water is the Caspian Sea here. And this is, again, a little bit disingenuous. It's probably not a true sea, and it's not even fully salt lake. It's sort of brackish water, but it is very large, very important body of water. All right, let's move down here. First, let's tackle this long strip, the Red Sea here, that goes out into the Arabian Sea through the Gulf of Aden, which is not a sea, but this is going to get a little bit confusion. But then we have the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, which are both classified as seas. So it gets sort of confusing here why some gulfs are declared seas and others aren't. I guess it sort of just depends on, maybe historicity or how it's described locally. Anyways, that being said, let's scoot back up into cozied up with Europe, and we get the Black Sea here, rather large. And if we go north to this little section of it, we find another sea called the Sea of Azov. And our final sea here in more Africa proper, we're going to go far down. Though, while it's in Africa proper, off Madagascar, this is, in fact, not a sea, but a lagoon. This is called Mer de Emeraude, or the Emerald Sea. So it's a sea in name only, and it's very small. We got to really zoom in. There we go, Mer de Emeraude. So the Emerald Sea, a lagoon on the northern tip of Madagascar. Now we're going to get into Japan itself, which is sort of like Canada, where it seems to have all these little seas around its coast, though with not a lot of information. Though unlike Canada, these had a little bit more information. They're actually called seas. A lot of, Japanese or like Americanized, whatever, how it works. Nada means sea, and so it'll be like something nada. Anyways, so let's take a look first. So we'll cover Sea of Japan with another spot. I just want to look at all the niggly little Japan ones. Anyways, so the biggest one is going to be, that comes up a lot, is the Seto Inland Sea. It's sort of this whole area here. And it's even more confusing because it's sort of split up into other smaller seas. And I didn't have the best, I had to really piece together what they actually were. And so that's why I have drawings with those little circle icons on the left here that hopefully best approximate where they actually are. So the first subset of the inland sea is Akanada, which is sort of this western part, kind of this boot area. And in the center here is going to be Bingo Nada, the Bingo Sea, and then this easternmost part here is the Harima Nada, the Harima Sea. And then these are some bays here. And then, while we're in sort of this area here, going to the sort of southwest here, we have the Amakusa Sea, which is apparently sort of in this area here near the town of Amakusa, apparently. That's, I think, what it's named for here. You're not going to see anything. But then we also have up in here, inland here, we have what's called the Iraqi Sea. And actually, it does actually show up here, and it's a victory here. This part is a sea here. And then final one for this round for Japan before we get to some other ones, we have what's called the Devil Sea. It's sort of Japan's version of the Bermuda Triangle, and it's not clear exactly where it is. One formulation I have as sort of a long icon with a red triangle. So it goes from Tokyo out a little bit, down almost to, I think all the way to Guam. So this is Guam here. So this sort of big triangle here to the east of the Philippine Sea. Tired of small obscure seas in Japan? No? Good. That'll come later. All right, so I'm going to take these by alphabetical order, just because they're not really going to show up, so we might as well just kind of jump around here. So first of all, kind of down here, sort of near this island, we have a sea that's going to be called Genkai Nada, and again, I'm probably butchering all this pronunciation, just bear with me. So somewhere around here. Then we have Hibiki Nada, which is, I think, a little bit farther down in the same general area, maybe like closer, a little bit closer to the shoreline. And I can't tell what distinguishes where. Then we have going back into the Seto Inland Sea. We have Huichi Nada, somewhere along this sort of coast here. And back down, we have along this part of this, probably next to the town of Huaiga, we have Huaiga Nada. Then back up to this Seto Inland Sea, just right around the same way of Huichi Nada, we have Itsuki Nada. Somewhere around the same sort of area. And then Ayo Nada. So what makes these seas different from each other, I do not know. Okay. 6 more seas and I swear we're done. Okay, so we're going to come up here, sort of this area here. There is Kashima Nada, so I guess alongside the coast of the town of Kashima. Apparently, then we have Kumano Nada, which is going to be around here next to this coastline, and I believe there's also a town called Kumano, so I guess relates to that town. Then back into the Seto Inland Sea. Up top here, there's somewhere up along this coastline, there's the Mizushima Sea. What makes that different from any other part of the Seto Inland Sea, I don't know. And then coming back over here, somewhere along this area, this coastline, there's the Suo Nada, Suo Sea. And then near the end here, we're going to get some real mixed up. We have something called the Tosa Wan. So I don't know what Wan means. Maybe that means bay or inlet or something, but apparently somewhere around here, probably next to Tosa Shimizu, it might even be this thing. I can't read the Japanese language. Something here. So Tosa Wan. And then finally, mixing up yet again, there's Uwa Kai, and I don't know what Kai means. Maybe it means straight or something like that, because apparently that's this part here. I guess next to Uwajima. All right, we're done with these little Japanese seas. I'm sure by now you're just traumatized. Later on, you'll be muttering in your sleep, and someone will ask you, like, "What do you keep using that word nada? What does that mean?" You'll be like, "It means sea in Japanese. It means sea in Japanese." Getting away from Japan, let's look at Russia, China, and Korea. So starting out here, sort of the big picture of north of Russia, we've got the East Siberian Sea to the east, and then the the Laptev Sea to the west. Let's kind of go over here too. We've already covered the Kara Sea in Northern Europe, but then there's this other more obscure sea down here that I think won't show up, but this is called the Bachorskaya More in Russian. More means more, or more means sea in Russian, apparently. Also known as the Pechora Sea, this little part here. Speaking of Russian names that I'm butchering pronunciation, there's also the Shantarskoye More, which is apparently the northwestern part of the Sea of Okhotsk. So this is the Shantarsky Ski, and then overall the Sea of Okhotsk is here. Then moving south here, we've got the Sea of Japan. I told you can't get away from Japan. Then we have the Yellow Sea, then the East China Sea, and south of the East China Sea, we have the South China Sea. And then the last sea kind of going back up here. The Yellow Sea, apparently this section of the Yellow Sea, this top here, that is also known as the Bohai Sea. Well, those last seas were large, well-defined seas, but don't worry. China has its own share of small, poorly defined, and low reference seas. And apparently in Chinese, yang means sea, so we have 4 seas around this area. So first of all, we have Mai Tao Yang, which is apparently somewhere up here. I guess part of the East China Sea. Then slightly higher around somewhere that area, there's the Mai Yu Yang. And even higher than that somewhere, like I said, I don't know what distinguishes them. But then there's Puto Yang. And then down to the south here, next to this island here, somewhere in this vicinity here, there is Quizhu Yang. And then going back to Wan, which we saw that in Japanese. I don't know if that's straight or something else, but there's a Wan called Penghu Wan near Taiwan here, which is next to, I guess, Penghu County, this, I guess, island or archipelago, whatever that would technically be. And then for North and South Korea, apparently in Korean, Hai is sea. So in the south here, somewhere along the southern edge of South Korea, we have a sea called the Haeungi Sea. Somewhere here, it's not going to show up. And finally, in North Korea, sort of on the coast here, northern coast, we have the Cheongseong-dong-hai, which seems to be named for this city here. So somewhere along this area. Let us shift our gaze to the multitudinous islands that make up the Philippines and Indonesia and company. So starting down here, we have the Java Sea, and then kind of in here, we have the Flores Sea, the Savu Sea, and somewhere here, if we can find it, if we're extra careful, there is the Bali Sea. There we go, Bali Sea. Okay, zooming out and then scooting over here to the Rio Archipelago. There's apparently 2 seas here. Then a Tuna Sea, which looks to be more along the coastline here, but I don't think it's going to show up. Okay, anything? Nope. It'll show up here, and then a little bit farther, more towards the west, we have Lepar. So Lepar might mean sea, so it's going to be somewhere in this vicinity. But again, I'm not seeing it show up. Okay, let's keep moving on here. Going up more towards the north here. South of the Philippines, we have the Sulu Sea. Then the Selby Sea, and apparently over here, They're sort of in the Philippine side of the Celebes Sea is sometimes called the Mindanao Sea. So, and then the Celebes Sea is retained as a side of Indonesia. Then a little bit farther south here, we have the Molucca Sea. Then keep moving along here, closing in on Papua New Guinea. We have the Banda Sea here, the Arafura Sea, the Timor Sea, and then if we zoom a little bit up here, we have the Seram Sea and the Halmahera Sea. Speaking of the Philippines, we of course cannot forget the Philippine Sea. We've already seen before, but that kind of stretches here to the east of the Philippines. Then there's smaller seas around the Philippines, whether or not they really show up. But down here, there's supposed to be, in some area here, the Bacoor Sea. And then also, kind of even in the same sort of vicinity, a couple names I've seen for is either the Kalupag or the Terrain Sea. Again, those are poorly referenced, but somewhere sort of as part of either the Celebes Sea or like the Sulu Sea, kind of in between those. Then kind of more into the islands, we've got here this sort of area is known as the Bohol Sea. We got here. Then there is also the Camotes Sea, which is around the Camotes Islands, and then also the Samar Sea, I guess next to the island of Samar Island, so somewhere in this kind of vicinity here, coastlines here. Then to wrap up the Philippines, to prove that I'm not just making up names out of a whole cloth, we have our last two seas that actually show up. We have the Visayan Sea, sort of right in the middle here, and then farther north, we have the Sibuyan Sea. And then finally, kind of to the northwest coast here, this part of the Philippine Sea is sometimes known as the West Philippine Sea, or also known as the Luzon Sea. I'm not seeing that show up, but that kind of area is where it's sort of delineated between the South China Sea proper and the west of the Philippines. Now for a grab bag of all the other sort of seas we missed in the vicinity. Let's go up to India here. We have the Bay of Bengal, which is a sea. Then to the east here, we have the Andaman Sea, also sometimes known as the Burma Sea. Then down by Sri Lanka, we have the Laccadive Sea. Moving over far to the east in the Papua New Guinea area, we have the Bismarck Sea to the north here. Then we have the Solomon Sea. And then, if we're very clever and sharp-eyed, we will find ourselves the Coral Sea off the coast of East Australia. Dropping down south, we get the Tasman Sea next to Tasmania. And then we will shoot out and try to find ourselves a Fiji, which is rumored, here's Fiji, rumored to have a sea called the Coral Sea. I don't think it's going to show up here because it's so small, sort of centered around Coral Island. So this sort of area here is supposed to be the Coral Sea. Not coral, but Coro. Circling back to something I forgot about is the Sea of Zanj, which is off the coast of East Africa. It's a historical name of a sea, so it's not going to, I think, show up here, but is kind of circled around here above Madagascar. That is sort of historical, and it's essentially the western part of the Indian Ocean. Lastly, we have Antarctica, and in this view, this is wholly unsuited for matching it up to my maps. So what I'm going to do is change this to globe view. There we go. We have Antarctica here. So let's get started. Starting up top here, none of these are going to show up, but these are what the seas are, part of the Southern Ocean. So we have the Scotia Sea kind of up here on the Falkland Islands up there. Then around this sort of arm here, we have the Weddell Sea. And then up here on this sort of ridge, we're going to have the Lazarev Sea and the Riesler-Larsen Sea. There's also another sea, at least in Scandinavian, called the Kong Haakon the seventh, so like the King Haakon the Seventh. Hav means sea in Scandinavian apparently, which sort of overlaps the Lazarev Sea and the Riesler-Larsen Sea. So I'm not really sure how to resolve that, other than the fact that there seems to be three seas there that sort of blend into each other. Okay, over kind of around this sort of area, we have the Cosmonaut Sea, and then the Cooperation Sea. Then there is the Davis Sea, followed by the Mawson Sea. Again, this is sort of approximate, and the edges of Antarctica shift, so it's hard to really match up other than broad things. And then kind of in this dip here, right before the dip, we have sort of the Urville Sea, the Solmov Sea, sort of the tip here, and then this sort of indentation here, this big indentation. In fact, it might even be one of the few things I would think maybe would be shown, but no, apparently still not, is the Ross Sea. And then coming around the other side here, so this jagged area, we have the Munson Sea, and then before the sort of peninsula, we have the Bellingshausen Sea. And those are all the seas in Antarctica. Bringing together all the seas under one slide. We have this in tabular form across section: North America, Central South America, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Africa, Middle East, Japan, Russia, China, and Korea, Indonesia and Philippines, India, and other Oceania. So what we have here is a total of 165 seas that we examined. Now, that only makes 109 if you don't consider poorly referenced seas like those in purple, or seas in name only like those in yellow. So however you put it, either 109 well-referenced seas or 165 seas, whether they're well-referenced or real seas or not.
Wasn't that a whirlwind tour of the compass points? I hope that our journey across every sea has left you more enlightened and not just more salty. We'll end there, but until next time, what do you do with a drunken sailor? Brace him for awesome, tell he's sober, early in the morning.